The Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace above Keth Prime in a formation that stretched across thousands of kilometers of void human. Warships formed the core of the attack force. Their hulls painted black and gray. Their weapons systems humming with deadly potential around them flew the ships of 13 allied species. A fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Overlord Kethser watched from his palace as his own armada moved to intercept the invaders. And despite everything, he felt confident the Keth military was the most powerful force in the sector, built over centuries of conquest and intimidation. And no ragtag coalition of minor species could hope to stand against it. Destroy them, he commanded, and leave no survivors. The battle began, but it did not go as the Overlord expected. The Coalition ships did not engage the main Keth fleet in direct combat instead. They scattered like water flowing around stones, slipping through gaps in the defensive formation, heading for specific targets with surgical precision. They are ignoring our warships, Shipmaster Rill reported with growing alarm. And they are heading for the weapon facilities. Stop them. Kethser snarled. Daryl tried his ships pursued the Coalition vessels. But the Alari navigators had plotted courses that exploited every weakness in Keth formations. And the Tessic engineers had modified Coalition engines to perform maneuvers that should have been impossible one by one. The stellar ignition facilities exploded in brilliant flashes of light as Coalition strike teams reached their targets. The humans are attacking the command centers, another officer reported. And our communications are being disrupted. Rally our forces to defend the palace, Kethser ordered, suddenly aware that the battle might not be going in his favor through the chaos. Shipmaster Rill noticed something strange. Evishon ships were descending toward the planet. But they were not attacking military targets. They were landing near civilian population centers. What are they doing? He wondered aloud. The answer came moments later when he witnessed something that shook his understanding of warfare to its core. Human soldiers were on the ground now, fighting their way through Keth defenses, but whenever they encountered Keth civilians, they did not kill them, they evacuated them. Veshan pilots were loading Keth children onto transport ships and carrying them away from the combat zones. Morthany medical teams were treating wounded Keth. Soldiers who had surrendered. Dealery scouts were guiding Keth families to safety shelters. Cyril watched in stunned silence as the species who had every right to hate the Keth instead chose to save them. They are not here to destroy us, he said slowly, the realization dawning. They are here to judge us. He thought of his own children safe in their home on a distant Keth colony. And he thought of what he would want an enemy to do if they had the power to kill them. He opened a communication channel to his fleet. All ships under my command, he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. Stand down, Shipmaster. The Overlord's orders. One of his captains protested. The Overlord ordered the death of 12 million innocents, Uriel replied. And I will not add more innocent blood to his account. Other Keth commanders watched as Uriel's ships lowered their weapons and withdrew from the battle. Some of them followed his example. Then more the Dominion fleet, fractured as captains and admirals made their own choices about what kind of beings they wanted to be. Overlord Kethser fled to his personal dreadnought as Coalition forces breached the palace defenses. Fleet Admiral Beek Junho led the pursuit himself, his flagship racing after the Overlord's vessel. You cannot escape, Beek transmitted. Your fleet has abandoned you, and your weapons facilities are destroyed, and your crimes have been witnessed by the entire galaxy. I am the Overlord of the Keth Dominion, Kethser screamed back. And you are nothing but vermin who will be exterminated. The children of Meridian 4 were not vermin, Beek replied calmly. The families who died in the stellar fire were not vermin. And the 12 million souls you murdered were not vermin. His weapons locked onto the dreadnought's engines, And neither are we. The shot was precise, disabling the Overlord's ship without destroying a coalition. Marines boarded the dreadnought and fought their way to the command deck when they reached Kethsar. He expected death instead. Commander No Taiwan stepped forward and placed restraints on his wrists. "You will stand trial," No said quietly, "and you will answer for every single name on the memorial." "Kill me," Kethsar demanded. "Give me a warrior's death." "No," No replied. "Death is easy." "And you have not earned easy." The battle ended. The stellar ignition facilities were rubble. The Overlord was in custody. The Dominion military had largely surrendered or withdrawn, and throughout it all, the Coalition had prioritized saving Keth civilian lives over taking them. 3 days later, the Galactic Senate convened an emergency session. The Coalition's actions had been illegal under Concordance Law. The major powers had condemned the attack in official statements. But when the time came to vote on sanctions against the Coalition, something unexpected happened. No one moved. No one spoke the evidence of what the Coalition had done. Not just the destruction of weapons, but the rescue of civilians. The mercy shown to surrendered soldiers, the determination to capture rather than kill, had spread across every network in the galaxy. People from hundreds of worlds had watched humans and their allies save Keth children. While Keth weapons burned, they had seen justice delivered without cruelty. Counselor Vareth rose from his seat. "The Coalition has broken our laws," he said. "But they have also shown us something important." He paused, looking around the chamber. "When you strike at humanity, they do not simply strike back. And they do not seek revenge or destruction." His voice grew stronger. "They build alliances with those the powerful have ignored. And they plan with patience that would terrify any strategist. And they fight with precision that minimizes casualties." He looked directly at the human delegation. "They make you watch as the entire galaxy turns against you. And they make you answer for your crimes while your own people abandon you. And they defeat you so thoroughly that your grandchildren will still be learning from your mistakes." The chamber was silent. "I move that the matter be closed without sanction." Vareth said. The motion passed unanimously 6 months later. Ambassador Sioha stood at the memorial for Meridian 4. A vast wall of crystal that held the names of 12 million Sol Storvek stood beside her, along with representatives from all 13 Coalition species. They had read every name over the past week, taking turns, sharing the weight of remembrance. "They would be proud," Torvik said quietly, "of what you built from their loss." "We did not build it alone," Yoon replied. She looked at the beings standing with her. These friends from across the stars who had answered when humanity called. "The Senate thought we were alone," she said. "The Keth thought we were broken. And perhaps even we thought we had been abandoned." She touched the crystal wall gently. "But the galaxy answered," she continued. "Not with governments or treaties or political calculations, but with ordinary people who remembered that kindness matters." Torvek clicked his mandibles softly. "What happens now?" he asked. Yoon turned to face him, and for the first time in months, she smiled. "Now we make sure this never happens again," she said. "Now we build something new. A coalition not of power but of principle. Not of fear but of friendship." She looked out at the stars. "Now we answer the galaxy the way it answered us." The memorial for Meridian 4 stood as a testament to loss, but also to what had been gained. 12 million souls had been taken, but their memory had created bonds that would span the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had not forgotten. The galaxy had answered, and together they would build a future worthy of those who had been lost. The names on the wall glittered in the starlight, remembered and honored forevermore. The station called New Meridian hung in space, like a monument to human determination. It had been constructed in just 3 months, built from salvaged materials and donated resources, and the tireless labor of thousands of hands, both human and Alien now had served as the headquarters for something that had never existed before in Galactic. History Ambassador Yoon Seoa stood at the head of a long table in the station's central conference room, looking out at the representatives of 13 species who had answered humanity's call. They called themselves the Coalition. The Veshan delegation was led by Torvik, who had been elevated from simple pilot to vessel commander in recognition of his service during the refugee crisis. The Morthani had sent their greatest admiral, a massive being suspended in a portable water tank, whose name translated roughly as Bosletis, she who moves through deep currents. The Alari delegation perched on specially designed stands, their bright feathers rustling with barely contained energy. The Tessic representative was a geometric form of living crystal that pulsed with soft light when it communicated, and there were 9 others, species that the Galactic Senate had never considered important enough to include in their deliberations. "Thank you all for coming," Yoon began, "and thank you for everything you have already done for humanity." "We did not come for thanks," the Morthani admiral rumbled, her voice translated through speakers built into her tank. "We came because the Keth must answer for their crimes, and they will," Yoon replied, "but I want to be absolutely clear about what we are asking." She activated a holographic display that showed the Keth Dominion and the forces arrayed against it. "The Galactic Senate has warned us that any attack on Keth space will be considered an act of aggression," she said. "They will not support us, and they may actively oppose us. The Senate is filled with cowards." One of the Alari representatives chirped angrily. "The Senate is filled with beings who have calculated that peace with the Keth is more valuable than justice for humanity," Yoon corrected gently, "and I will not pretend that their calculation is unreasonable." She looked around the room at each delegation in turn. "War is terrible," she continued, "and if you join us in this, some of your people will die, and your worlds may face retaliation, and your economies may suffer. We know the risks," Torvik said, "and we have already made our decision." "I know," Yoon said, "but I need you to understand something important, and I need you to truly hear what I am saying." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "We do not ask anyone to fight our war," she said slowly. "We do not demand your participation, and we do not expect it. And if any of you choose to leave this room right now and return to your homes, we will not think less of you." The room was silent, but Yoon continued, "We will not stop those who wish to stand with us." The Tessic representative pulsed with a complex pattern of light. "Your words are appreciated, Ambassador." The translation came through, "but unnecessary, for we have already committed ourselves to this cause." "Why?" Yoon asked, and her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Why would you risk so much for a species that is not your own?" "Because you are our own," the Morthani admiral said simply, "perhaps not by blood or biology, but by the bonds we have chosen to create." She moved her massive form forward in her tank. "When my people were drowning in our own oceans due to the temperature changes caused by our failing star, it was human engineers who built the cooling systems that saved us." Torvik stepped forward. "When the plague nearly destroyed my species, human doctors came to our worlds without being asked and without expectation of payment. The Alari delegation fluttered their wings. When our migration routes were threatened by raiders, human patrol ships escorted our flocks to safety. One by one, the other delegations shared their own stories of times when humanity had helped them. Small kindnesses and forgotten generosities that humans had barely noticed, but that had meant everything to the recipient. Yoon stood in silence as the testimonies washed over her, tears streaming down her face. She had not known none of them had known all. Those small acts of decency over the years had created bonds that stretched across the galaxy, invisible threads of gratitude and loyalty that were now drawing together into something powerful. "Very well," she said when the testimonies had finished. "Then let us discuss how we will bring justice to the Keth." Fleet Admiral Baek Junho took over the briefing. activating detailed tactical displays. Our goal is not conquest, he said firmly, and our goal is not revenge. Though we would be justified in seeking both. He highlighted specific targets within Keth space. We will strike at 3 objectives. He continued. First, the facilities that produce stellar ignition devices, and we have identified 4 such facilities. Thanks to the intelligence gathered by Commander No's team, the display showed the locations. Deep within Keth territory, but far from civilian population centers. Second, the military command infrastructure that ordered the attack on Meridian 4, and these targets are more heavily defended, but equally important. More locations appeared on the display. Third, and most important, Overlord Kethsar himself. The Morthani Admiral made a sound that might have been satisfaction. We kill him, she said. No, Beak replied. We capture him. The room erupted in surprise conversation. The creature murdered 12 million people. One of the Alari protested, and death is the least of what he deserves. Perhaps, Beak acknowledged, but death is also easy, and death is an ending. And we do not want the Overlord's story to end with a quick and merciful death. He looked around the room. We want him to stand trial before the entire galaxy. And we want him to answer for every single life he took. And we want the Keth people to watch their leader be judged for his crimes. That is a more difficult objective. The Tessic observed. It is, Beak agreed. But it is also more important. Because we are not trying to defeat the Keth. We are trying to prove that there is a better way. Yoon stepped forward again. Admiral Beak is right, she said. If we simply destroy the Keth and slaughter their people, we become no better than them. And we dishonor the memory of everyone who died on Meridian 4. She looked at Torvik. Your people are converting your trade ships into supply runners and medical vessels, she said. I want you to also prepare evacuation craft. Evacuation craft? Torvik asked. Confused. For whom? For Keth civilians who may be caught in the combat zones. The room fell silent again. You want us to rescue the people who cheered when your world burned? The Morthani Admiral asked incredulously. I want us to be better than our enemies. Yoon replied simply, and I want the galaxy to see the difference between those who destroy worlds and those who save lives. A message arrived from the Galactic Senate, transmitted across all official channels. It warned that any attack on the Keth Dominion would be condemned, and that the coalition would stand alone against any consequences. Yoon read the message aloud to the assembly. We stand alone then, she said, but we stand together. A private communication arrived moments later. Marked with Counselor Varath's personal seal. Yoon opened it. What you do is illegal under concordance law. Varath had written, and I cannot support you publicly. There was a pause then. Give them hell. Yoon smiled and looked out at the coalition representatives. Are we ready? She asked. We are ready. They answered as one. The coalition fleet jumped to hyperspace. Their destination, the heart of the Keth Dominion justice, was coming. Overlord Kethsar stood at the window of his palace and looked out over the capital city of the Keth Dominion with deep satisfaction. 1 month had passed since the destruction of Meridian 4, and everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The humans had raged and mourned and demanded justice, but the Galactic Senate had done nothing. Just as he had known, they with the great powers of the galaxy were too afraid of Keth military strength to risk war over a single human colony. And without their support, humanity was powerless to retaliate. Overlord, his aide announced from the doorway. Shipmaster Rill requests an audience. Kethsar waved his hand in permission. And a moment later his most trusted military commander entered the chamber. Rill was young for a shipmaster, barely a century old. But he had proven himself in a dozen campaigns against lesser species who had challenged Keth dominance. Report. Kethsar commanded. There have been some unusual developments. Overlord, Uriel said, and there was something in his voice that Kethsar did not like. Explain. Our trade convoys have been experiencing delays. Uriel said. The Vision have stopped accepting our merchants at their stations. Kethser dismissed this with a wave of his clawed hand. The Vision are insects who move cargo from one port to another, and their absence is meaningless. Yes, Overlord, Uriel agreed. However, other species have also begun refusing our trade, and the Alari have closed their navigation routes to our ships, and the Tessic have cancelled all engineering contracts with Dominion worlds. Now Kethser turned from the window to face his shipmaster directly. These are minor inconveniences, he said. But a small seed of doubt had begun to grow in his mind. There is more. Overlord, Uriel continued, our diplomatic missions have been experiencing difficulties, and meetings are being cancelled without explanation, and our ambassadors report being treated with unusual coldness. The galaxy fears us, Kethser said firmly. This is simply their way of expressing disapproval without taking any real action. Perhaps, Uriel said, but I am concerned about the humans themselves. What about them? They have done nothing. Kethser waited for more, but Uriel simply stood in silence. Nothing is what I expected, Kethser said slowly. No. Overlord, Uriel replied. You expected rage and grief and desperate attacks against our borders. But there has been nothing of the kind, and their military remains at defensive positions, and their government has made no public statements of retaliation. They are broken, Kethser said. We crushed their spirit when we destroyed their world. I do not believe that is the case. Kethser's eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain yourself. Shipmaster. Uriel reached into his uniform and produced a small data device. 3 days ago, our border patrols captured a human probe in restricted space, he said. It contained a single message. He activated the device, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. The message was simple. Just text in the human language with a translation provided below. We know who gave the order, it read. We know where he sleeps, and we are patient. Kethser stared at the message for a long moment. A bluff, he said finally. They are trying to frighten us with empty threats. Perhaps, Uriel said again. But our intelligence suggests that human special operations teams have been active throughout the border regions. Doing what? Nothing, Uriel said, and the word hung in the air with terrible weight. They are watching and mapping and gathering information, but they have not attacked anything or sabotaged anything or taken any hostile action. Then they are harmless. No. Overlord, Uriel said quietly. They are waiting, deep in Keth space, far from any patrol routes or military installations. Commander No Taiwan floated in the darkness aboard a stealth vessel so small and so quiet that it was virtually invisible to Keth sensors. He had been here for 3 weeks now, watching and learning and preparing his team of 12. Specialists had mapped every security protocol around the Overlord's palace, identified every escape route, tracked every patrol schedule, and noted every weakness in the Dominions. Defenses they had not fired a single shot or planted a single explosive or taken any action that could be detected. That was not their mission. Their mission was to wait. Commander No reviewed the latest intelligence reports from across the Dominion, and what he saw made him smile grimly. The economic isolation was working better than anyone had expected. Species that the Keth had dismissed as unimportant were revealing just how important they actually were. The Vishan controlled nearly 40% of all interstellar shipping in the region, and without their cooperation, Keth supply lines were stretched thin. The Ilari provided navigation data that made hyperspace travel safer and faster, and without their services, Keth ships were forced to take longer routes. The Tessic maintained the sophisticated technology that kept Keth infrastructure running, and without their engineers, equipment was beginning to fail. None of this was warfare in the traditional sense. It Was something worse. It was the galaxy slowly turning its back on the Keth Dominion. Not with armies or weapons, but with silence and closed doors and the simple refusal to cooperate. Commander. No. Received a transmission from Human Command. Encrypted and compressed into a burst so short that it would appear as nothing more than random cosmic radiation. Phase 1 complete. The message read, "Begin Phase 2. No acknowledged the order and began preparing his team for the next stage of their mission. They would still not attack. They would still not sabotage. They would simply move closer and watch more carefully and make certain that when the time came, they would know exactly where to strike back in his palace." Overlord Kefsir dismissed Shipmaster Rill and returned to the window. The capital city spread out below him. A testament to Keth power and civilization, he told himself. That the humans were weak and broken, and that their threats meant nothing. He told himself that the economic difficulties were temporary, and that the other species would eventually return to trading with the Dominion. He told himself that he had won, but somewhere deep in his mind, in a place he would never acknowledge, a small voice whispered that the humans were not grieving. They were preparing, and when they finally moved, all the military might of the Keth Dominion might not be enough to stop what was coming. The Overlord pushed that voice aside and returned to his duties. He had a Dominion to rule, and he would not be frightened by the empty threats of a broken species. He was so very wrong. Ambassador Yun Sioa stood before the Galactic Senate with her hands clasped behind her back and her spine straight as steel. The great chamber stretched around her in a massive circle, filled with delegates from over 200 species, and every single one of them was watching her with expressions that ranged from pity to discomfort to carefully practiced neutrality. 3 days ago, the human colony world of Meridian 4 had been home to 12 million people. Now it was ash and silence honored delegates. Yun began, and her voice carried across the chamber without trembling. "I present to you evidence of a crime against all civilized beings." The holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing a beautiful blue and green world spinning slowly in the void of space. And then the image changed to show something terribly weapon had been deployed in the heart of the system's star. A device that forced the star to expand in a massive burst of radiation and fire. And Meridian 4 had been caught in that wave of destruction. A stellar ignition device, Yun continued. Technology that has been banned under the Concordance Accords for over 10,000 years. Was used to murder 12 million human civilians. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Torvani delegation shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their scaled faces betraying nothing but their clawed hands gripping their armrests tightly. The Veshan traders in the upper galleries clicked their mandibles in what might have been distress. The Morthani ambassador, suspended in her water-filled pod, turned her massive eyes away from the images. "Our investigation has confirmed the source of this weapon," Yun said. And she paused for just a moment before speaking the words that would change everything. The stellar ignition device was deployed by the Keth Dominion. Now the chamber erupted in noise, voices overlapping in dozens of languages, translators struggling to keep up with the chaos. The Keth delegation rose from their seats in unified outrage, their gray-skinned forms towering over the smaller species around them, their black eyes burning with what they claimed was righteous anger. "Lies," the Keth representative snarled. "Human lies designed to justify their endless expansion into territories that do not belong to them." Yun did not flinch. She simply gestured to the holographic display, which now showed sensor data, communication intercepts, and the energy signature of the weapon itself. A signature that matched Keth military technology with perfect precision. "The evidence speaks for itself," she said quietly. Councillor Vareth of the Tovani rose from his seat at the highest level of the chamber. his ancient scales gray with age and his eyes sharp with intelligence. That had guided galactic politics. For over a century, the Senate acknowledges the tragedy that has befallen humanity, he said in a voice that carried the weight of his authority, and we extend our deepest sympathies. Yoon felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew that tone. She had heard it 100 times in 100 negotiations, and it always preceded disappointment. However, Vareth continued, the evidence presented requires thorough investigation, and we must consider the consequences of any action against a sovereign power such as the Keth Dominion. 12 million people are dead, Yoon said, and for the first time her voice cracked just slightly. How much more investigation do you require? Vareth spread his clawed hands in a gesture of helpless regret. War is a terrible thing. Ambassador and the Senate must be certain before we condemn an entire civilization, one by one. The other major powers added their voices to the chorus of caution. The Tavani urged patience. The Ilari called for diplomatic solutions. The Tessic remained silent, their crystalline forms flickering with colors that no one could interpret, and throughout it all, the Keth sat in smug satisfaction, knowing that their military strength made the Senate fear them more than they mourned humanity's dead. The vote came 3 hours later, the motion to censure the Keth Dominion failed the motion to investigate, failed the motion to provide humanitarian aid to human survivors passed by a narrow margin. And even that small mercy came with conditions and limitations that made it nearly worthless. Ambassador Yoon stood in the center of the chamber as the delegates filed out, some of them offering her sympathetic glances, most of them simply avoiding her eyes. Councillor Vareth paused beside her on his way out. I am sorry, he said quietly. Truly I am, but the Senate cannot risk war with the Keth over one colony world. One colony world, Yoon repeated softly. 12 million souls, and you call it one colony world. Vareth had the grace to look ashamed. Politics requires difficult choices, Ambassador, and I hope one day you will understand. He left, and Yoon stood alone in the empty chamber. Her communicator buzzed, and she answered it to find the stern face of Fleet Admiral Baek Junho, looking back at her through the holographic display. I watched the proceedings, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. What are our orders? Yoon was silent for a long moment. She thought of Meridian 4, of the cities and farms and schools that had been wiped from existence in an instant. She thought of the children who would never grow up, the dreams that would never be realized, the families that had been torn apart. She thought of all the species who had sat in this chamber and chosen their own comfort over justice. We remember, she said finally. We remember who stood with us today. No one stood with us, Baek replied bitterly. Exactly, Yoon said, and her voice had grown cold and hard as the void between stars. We remember who stood with us, and we remember who did not. She ended the communication and walked out of the Senate chamber. Corridors of Concordance Prime were filled with diplomats and politicians and bureaucrats, all of them going about their business as if nothing had changed, as if 12 million humans had not just been erased from existence. Yoon walked past them all without seeing them in her mind. She was already planning. The Senate had chosen to do nothing, but humanity had not survived countless hardships by relying on the charity of others. They had survived by remembering, by enduring, by waiting until the moment was right, and then by answering every wrong that had been done to them. The Keth Dominion had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that destroying one world would break humanity's spirit. They had assumed that the Senate's inaction would leave humans helpless and alone. They had assumed that grief would make humanity weak. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Ambassador Yoon Seoha stepped onto her shuttle and set course for human space. Behind her, The Galactic Senate continued its business. Confident that the crisis had been managed, they had no idea what was coming. The colony ship Remembrance had been built to carry settlers to new worlds and fill them with hope and new beginnings. Now it drifted in the darkness of space, surrounded by dozens of smaller vessels, serving as a refugee center for the survivors of Meridian Ive. Dr. Cha Minji had not slept in 4 days. She moved through the crowded medical bay with hollow eyes and steady hands, treating burns and radiation, sickness and the deep psychological wounds that no medicine could heal. There were thousands of survivors from the orbital stations and the ships that had managed to flee before the star's deadly expansion reached them. Thousands out of 12 million. The numbers haunted her every time she closed her eyes. Dr. Cha, one of her assistants, called out, "We are running low on burn treatment supplies." "I know," Minji replied without looking up from her current patient, a young girl who had lost her entire family. "Ration what we have and prioritize the critical cases." She had sent requests to human space for supplies, but their resources were stretched thin. The military guarded the borders against possible Keth aggression, and civilian supply lines were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the disaster. They were alone. That was what the Senate's decision had truly meant. Humanity was alone. The communication console beeped, and Minji ignored it until her assistant spoke again. "Doctor, there are ships approaching." Minji felt her heart freeze in her chest. "Keth?" she asked, already reaching for the emergency protocols. "No," her assistant said slowly, confusion evident in her voice. "They appear to be Veshan trading vessels." Minji frowned and made her way to the bridge, where the captain of the Remembrance was staring at the sensor display with an expression of pure bewilderment. Dozens of ships were emerging from hyperspace around them. Veshan traders with their distinctive curved hulls. Morthani waterships, massive spherical vessels designed for their aquatic specialary scout craft, sleek and fast and painted in bright color. Stesic cargo haulers, angular and practical and enormous. "They are hailing us," the captain said. "On screen," Minji replied. Though she was not sure why she had taken command of this momenta, Veshan face appeared on the display, 4 eyes blinking in sequence, mandibles clicking in what she recognized as a greeting gesture. "Human vessel Remembrance." The Veshan said, "I am Torvik of the Veshan Trade Guild, and I have brought supplies and medical equipment." "We did not request aid from the Vishan," Minji said cautiously. "No," Torvik agreed. "You did not, but we are here anyway." "Why?" Torvik tilted his head, his antennae twitching. "Because you needed help," he said simply. As if that explained everything, the Vishan ships began docking procedures without waiting for permission, and Minji found herself hurrying to the cargo bays to stop them or question them or understand what was happening. She arrived to find Torvik already directing his crew to unload crates of medical supplies, food, water purification equipment, and emergency shelters. "Wait," Minji said, stepping in front of him. "You cannot just come here and take over." Torvik did not stop working. "I am not taking over," he said. "I am helping, and you can either assist me or stand there. But I am going to unload these supplies regardless." "The Senate abandoned us," Minji said, and she hated how bitter her voice sounded. "Why should we trust anyone who is not human?" Torvik finally paused and turned his 4 eyes to look at her directly. "The Senate speaks for governments," he said, "but we are not governments, and we speak for ourselves." More ships continued to arrive throughout the next several hours. Morthani brought their advanced water purification technology, capable of recycling waste into clean drinking water with perfect efficiency. The Lari offered their services as navigators and pilots, their natural talent for spatial awareness making them invaluable for coordinating the growing fleet of relief vessels. The Tesic Those mysterious silicon-based beings who rarely interacted with organic species arrived with engineering equipment and began repairing damaged ships without being asked. Minji watched it all in stunned silence. "Why?" she asked Torvik again, when they finally had a moment to rest. "Your people have no alliance with humanity, no treaties, no obligations." Torvik clicked his mandibles in what she was beginning to recognize as a laugh. "Do you remember the Veshan plague of 30 years ago?" he asked. Minji shook her head. "Humans probably do not remember it," Torvik said. "Because to you, it was a small thing, a minor humanitarian mission that your government barely noticed." He paused, his antennae lowering in what might have been emotion. "But to us, it was everything. And when we were dying and no one in the galaxy would help us because we were too small and too unimportant, human doctors came to our worlds and human ships brought medicine and human hands held our children while they recovered." Minji felt tears building in her eyes. "We did not know," she whispered. "Did not need to know," Torvik replied. "You helped because we needed help, and now we help because you need help. And that is how it should be between friends." A transmission arrived from the Veshan homeworld, and Elder Sin, the leader of their trade guild, appeared on the screen. "Humans of the Remembrance," Elder Sin said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "The Galactic Senate has failed you, but we have not." She gestured with her forearms, and the display showed a map of the galaxy, with dozens of points of light moving toward human space. "Every ship you see represents people who chose to help," Elder Sin continued. "Not because they were ordered to, not because they will profit from it, but because humanity showed us kindness when we were small." Her eyes seemed to look directly at Minji through the screen. "We do not forget our debts," Elder Sin said, "and we do not abandon our friends." The transmission ended, and Minji stood in the cargo bay surrounded by aliens who had come from across the galaxy to help her people. Torvik appeared beside her and gently took her arm. "You have been awake for too long," he said. "Let someone else carry the burden for a few hours." Minji wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she had to keep working, but the exhaustion finally caught up with Hirsch. He let Torvik guide her to a quiet corner where a Morthani had prepared a comfortable resting area. "Thank you," she managed to say before sleep claimed. Torvik watched her for a moment, then returned to work outside the Remembrance. The relief fleet continued to grow as more ships arrived from species that the Senate had dismissed as too small and too weak to matter. The galaxy had answered after all, just not the parts that humanity had expected.